My name is Partha Srinivasa. I'm the Chief Data Officer for Verisk, which is one of the largest data and analytics firm in the world. So our primary focus was to get a holistic view of our data so we can get a census of every single related data of the company, all the files and data which are related to that, and all the metadata which are related to that, and also the lineage related to that. How does the data flow? But what we were able to do with Data.World, one of the key themes, what we decided as a data company is we wanted to drive the culture of data in the company. So we wanted access to the data to every single employee of the company so they can see what exists in the company. But we wanted to make it easy, not for just the IT guys, but also for sort of the lowest common denominator. So anyone in the company can have access to it. But it also provided the ability to govern our data, catalog our data, manage our data, and more importantly, collaborate with our data. Now, because of this data immediately available, easily accessible, it actually enables us to launch newer products because we can take this information and do that. Our data scientists are always scouting for new type of data, which they can use in their models. And in the past, this process used to take months to get that information. So now they can basically go online and get this in minutes. We actually call our project, the Data.World project as Gateway. And that was a deliberate reason why we came up with the name called Project Gateway, because that is a gateway to entire data ecosystem. So there's a lot of AWS related technology. We obviously have Snowflakes too, Databricks, like Oracle and IBM and Microsoft and etc. It's not an IT program, but it was a business program to drive some real business value, which could be growth, speed to market, operational efficiency, reducing our risk, and making sure that we are compliant from a privacy rules, governance, etc. So like many of us do when we have our browser, what do we have as our homepage for the browser? Very common these days is Google. Pretty much everyone has a google.com as their homepage. I don't think the browsers told you to keep google.com. You kept it that way because you felt going to Google is a great way to start and go somewhere else. And our success will be the day when people see Data.World as that and go from there to all the different places to launch. I think that will be a great story to say.
Hi, I'm Rahul Kumar, Senior Data Engineer at Data.World. As more organizations implement DataOps and data catalogs, they must avoid building metadata museums as they try to build the information radiators they want. In this fireside chat, Bar Moses, CEO and co-founder of Monte Carlo, and John Lyons, our Chief Product Officer and co-founder, explore the DataOps ecosystem and discuss what it takes to make your data discoverable, useful, and able to solve business problems.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Lyons. I'm the Chief Product Officer and one of the co-founders here at Data.World. I'm so very excited today to have with me a really good friend and somebody who has made a lot of waves, frankly, in the data ops space over the last couple of years. I have CEO of data observability and reliability company Monte Carlo, and truly a really great thinker and leader in this space, Bar Moses, with me. Thank you so much for being with us today, Bar.
Hey, John. Awesome to be here.
Yeah. So, Bar, you really have written a lot and contributed a lot to thinking about data ops, thinking about data observability, data reliability, and applying a lot of these principles to the data analytics space. You've got a really interesting background and you're building a great company and a great product in Monte Carlo that a lot of people are excited about. What brought you to this? What got you interested in it, and why is it important to you that people start learning about these things?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll just start by saying I don't think there's a better industry than data right now. Like, I'm saying this selfishly, but I'm stoked about the data industry. I think it's one of the fastest growing areas. I think there are some amazing sort of new roles that we're seeing, new personas. Data analyst, data engineer, ML engineer, data product manager, like pick your, pick whatever you'd like, right? It's like pick your own journey. I think the data industry offers amazing career opportunities. I think there's awesome, long-lasting businesses that have really solidified themselves. Like obviously Databricks and Snowflake and many others that are actually accelerating in growth even at their scale, which is really outstanding. I think there's amazing ecosystems built around those companies. And I think data leaders and data teams in general have a lot of power in the organization today, and data is just becoming front and center everywhere. So I'm stoked about that. And then I think the flip side of that is there's a lot of hard problems to solve in data. There's actually a lot of things that we haven't solved yet, a lot of real pain points, a lot of real things that people are struggling with. And there's a lot of change. And that just, I'm super attracted to that. I think that's super exciting and, a space that you can learn a lot from and can grow from. In my personal journey, prior to starting Monte Carlo, I led a data team among other teams at a company called Gainsight, which is a customer success company. And so for me, near and dear to my heart are customers. That's sort of, where everything starts and stops for me. And as someone who was in the shoes of my customers, there were a lot of challenges that I face, and I think many folks are facing today. Some of them include a lot of sort of different solutions, or a lot of different sort of frameworks are thought of in silo in DataOps. A lot of them are actually sort of oriented around, specific capabilities or specific, sort of technologies, instead of actually starting with the pain point of the customer. I personally experienced that when I was sort of struggling with data on my end, and trying to figure out, like, how do we actually deliver data to our customers? And I wasn't sure that there was actually a solution for what I was looking for. And I think that actually points to sort of the second problem that I see, which is a lot of lack of automation. We're still relying on, very, very sort of manual methodologies, and it isn't working anymore. And then, I think maybe the third final thing that I see that is really sort of exciting is sort of this massive shift in how data works. So I think before, data was really sort of consolidated to one place, just your data warehouse, or one sort of place where everyone kind of, relied on. And today, data is very, very distributed. And so that makes some really fundamental questions pop back again in a new form. And so, I think that the really sort of pivotal moment for the data industry is where there's this fast growth and a lot of change and a lot of sort of momentum, but also some very, very hard real problems. And I personally am very just excited about that.
That's awesome. So you talked about a couple of things that I'm also very excited about in the data analytics space, and a couple of things that really directly led us to founding Data.World as well, right? Which is, there are so many more people coming to the data analytics world looking for ways to solve tough business problems, to make business decisions in more equitable and inclusive ways and transparent ways that are objective. And that's really exciting. You have all these roles cropping up: your data stewards, your data product managers. So you have more people. At the same time, you have more people, you have more data, right? Everybody knows about the 3 V's of data: volume, variety, and velocity. So your data is exploding. The number of people that want to work with it, that's getting huge. And then you also have more tools, and with more tools kind of come more problem. It becomes this like temptation to try to like put your arms around it, try to wrestle it to the ground, try to get everybody to like be consistent. And I think one of the things for us starting Data.World is to think about building tools that will help people work better together on these like specific data analytics problems, right? And I think this idea of data ops, co-opting things like DevOps and the ideas behind DevOps, things like observability and reliability, things like on our side, cataloging, that is one way of bringing people together, right? But I see a tremendous need to create both tools and processes that can help people work better together in these environments. I think data ops, like I'm really excited about that movement. We also have movements like data mesh and things like that. But data ops in particular is interesting because to me, that's how do we build better pictures of the ecosystem for the people, primarily for the people, so they can get their jobs done better. Like what are some of the things you're seeing out there, right? Like this proliferation of things kind of creates a problem. I hope data ops is a way that we can help people wrap their arms around that. And I hope it also gives them a way of working better together on these things. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, helping teams and organizations work better together is one of sort of the biggest challenges. So love that you all are addressing that. I would add to your list of problems another problem, which is, I mean, problem in quotations, is that data is becoming way more front and center, right? Before, data really was consolidated oftentimes to what I would call sort of business information, sort of information about like how many customers you had and what was your revenue and all that. And that was often really just siloed to the finance team or maybe a different sort of reporting team. Today, there's a couple of things that sort of massively change that. First of all, data has become way more widespread. So almost everyone at the company is actually using data oftentimes, right? Starting from engineering and product, marketing, sales, customer success, et cetera. The notion of let's make a decision based on what data we have is not that crazy today. And so actually sort of enabling that is hard. And then the second is there's a rise of new industries that are very data-driven. Let's take fintech, for example, right? Many, it's obviously sort of a booming industry, companies like Affirm, many others, where data is just very core to their product. And similarly, let's take InsurTech, right? So the rise of companies in that area means that, their business really drives based on data. And it's not just a competitive advantage, it's the lifeblood of their product. And so I think data ops in that lens has become more and more important, becoming front and center. And, I think there's a bunch of different sort of things that come up or sort of we hear from our customers. Data mesh is certainly one that comes up, and, we can talk about that separately. But, I think along some of the things that come up for us around data ops that we see is, I would call it like self-service anything, right? Just whatever you can self-serve, let's do that. I think there's actually good reason for that. So I think historically, when we were sort of in this world where data was used by a small number of people and not very often, the notion of a centralized sort of place or centralized team that has access to all data was sufficient and it was fine. And you could create these silos and it wasn't a big deal. But today you have a team that's basically sort of bottlenecked with hundreds of different requests. And like, if you actually want to get something done, like wait for next year and talk to me later. And if you actually want to have more and more folks use data, you need to start thinking about what portions of the data stack and of your data processes you can actually make self-service. Now, obviously, there is a lot of complications. You're giving people keys to the castle here. So what does that mean? But I think the drive for self-service is very strong. The second I would say is, machine learning anything, right? Let's machine learning it. I think oftentimes we see, sort of processes that used to take sort of days or weeks being automated more broadly. And a lot of that is thanks to automation and, sometimes powered by machine learning, sometimes not. I think there's a lot of work that's being done on sort of reducing the noise of these algorithms and, making automation smarter and better and more useful. So I see that a lot. And then I think the third, kind of interesting thing that we're starting to see is something that was sort of pioneered by Andrew Ng, which is, when you think about AI, is that sort of a more data-centric view or a model-centric view? Mm-hmm. And I think there's sort of there's some early movement around focusing on data accuracy versus model accuracy can actually generate much stronger results. And there's some new quantifiable evidence to support that, which I think is a very interesting, quite radical, but a very interesting notion. I think is interesting and picking up speed.
Right. So I'm intrigued by the first of your problems there, right? The idea of self-serving. You're right. More and more people want access to data. We've seen a lot of promises of self-serve. Right. But I think making a data ecosystem truly self-serve, it's difficult, right? You just can't hand somebody a piece of database, throw them a BI tool and go to town, right? We've seen a lot of that. I mean, I was plagued with that at the job I was at before we started Data.World, where I'm like, I got a Tableau instance with 600 dashboards. I don't know what any of these mean, if any of them are accurate, and what's going on here. I think if we want to really tackle self-serve and do it in a meaningful way that's actually productive to organizations, there's a lot of education that has to go on, right? People need to feel included, like they can learn and like they can glean the information they need to make like trustworthy decisions quickly. And that's something I'm excited that data ops, some of the principles of data ops aims to do, a lot like, DevOps with things like observability. Now, I make a catalog, you make a data reliability, a data quality platform, right? If we want to build this ecosystem and we want people to have trust, if we're going to build something that can truly educate people so they really truly can self-serve, what do you think are some of the, beyond a catalog and observability, what are some of the other critical parts of the DataOps stack that people should be looking at?
That's a great question. And actually, by the way, on sort of the self-serve question, Ben Stansel from Mode wrote a great blog post about this, which I recommend, sort of speaking more about that. When you think about sort of the kind of the stack, if you will, for DataOps, for me, it comes down to a couple of very fundamental questions. I think we need to get the basic rights, and until we get the basic right, it's really hard to move on to something. Let's first figure out what we need to make the data available to people, to your point, right? In fact, there's a couple of things. I think the first is what you call data discovery, right? Which obviously, data catalog takes a huge part in. But if you can't, if there's 600 dashboards in Tableau and you can't for the life of you figure out what dashboard to use and how you should use it, it's really hard, right? So I think data discovery is one. I think the other is data observability, actually. So the ability to know of the data sets that I'm using, which one can I trust, right? Mm-hmm. I think those, for me, are the two fundamental questions. I think there's additional questions around sort of the ability to experiment with that data, explore that data. There's ability to govern that data. And so access is really important. And we're seeing shifts in all of these sort of markets and all of these changes. But I will say that one important distinction is between, are we going after sort of a pain point or sort of a technical capability, or the solution itself, right? In the end, what we need to drive to, everyone needs to drive to, is data trust. And your data ops stack should enable that, but just stacking up things just for the sake of checking a box doesn't make sense, right? I think it's important to have in mind, what value does this bring to both the data team and to our end users? Starting with that actually makes the decisions on the stack itself very obvious.
Right.
Oftentimes.
That's great. So actually, I think what you just brought up is really good. In my notes here, I have my next question, which, if you think about data ops capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you got observability, you got catalog, classification, which helps with governance that you talked about, right? Do I know what this data actually is, and should somebody be using it? Role or domain-based access control, data mesh capabilities, modeling capabilities. All of this ultimately can lead to a lot of tool fatigue, right? And so I think you already kind of gave us one way of sort of combating that tool fatigue, which is, we'll start with the use case, start with the critical thing that people are looking at. But from a trend standpoint, what are you seeing out there as you go talk to customers and partner with your clients? What are you seeing in terms of people wanting to go best of breed versus picking, hey, I've just got too much. I've got too much tool fatigue. Just give me one thing, right? I want everything, right?
Yeah.
And that, looking back at other trends, looking at DevOps, where they definitely have gone best of breed, right? What are you seeing out there with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, looking at the DevOps market as a corollary can be interesting. I think, maybe taking a step back, there's a general cycle that enterprise markets just go through, right? And a lot of that has to do with maturity. The DevOps market is very mature, right? And as markets sort of from creation to maturity, they obviously change. And the question of best in breed versus sort of a single, platform changes with that. So DevOps is one where, after literally 2 decades of development, that's allowed for very specialized solution to emerge. And those are very mature. And then today, a DevOps team will very likely to pick and choose sort of a best in breed. Similar markets to that are sales tools and marketing tools, right? I read not too long ago, I think there's over 3,000 tools in that category. And as a sales ops leader, or marketing ops leader, how are you go choose from 3,000 tools, right? And I think again, taking a step back in SaaS more broadly, we're seeing a ton of new companies who are getting a ton of traction and many new unicorns and exits. And I think that speaks, again, to the ability to solve lots of problems and to the maturity of some of these categories. Now, early markets, on the other hand, oftentimes tend to be consolidated. And that's because a vendor can't rely on other vendors to solve customers' pain point. And then oftentimes in those instances, vendors tend to go more holistically and the solution ends up to be more encompassing. Now, if you sort of take that and apply that to data, obviously, if you look at larger companies like Snowflake, Databricks, Google, AWS, I think they're all trying to build sort of a tightly integrated suite of solutions, I would call it, right? And on top of that, there's likely parts of that stack that I think will remain best of breed, remain to be more specialized, as well as earlier categories, which sort of will have these kind of holistic solutions. I'll say specifically sort of on my journey, when I started Monte Carlo, I remember sort of before being in my customer's shoes, I was often very inundated by sort of the list of options, not only by, the number of sort of vendors within a particular solution, but also the number of problems I had to solve, right? And so oftentimes I get questions from our customers like, where do we even start? Like, we have a data platform, but what problems should we tackle first? And I do think the market is sort of slightly correcting itself today. And I think there is more clarity around where we should focus. And I do think folks realize that there's some fundamentals that you need to sort of address before kind of fully, if you want these data initiatives to succeed. And I'll give you a particular example sort of from my day-to-day. I think I mentioned it's oftentimes sort of overlooked to kind of think through sort of the customer pain. We had a customer that we work with in the very, very early days of Monte Carlo. And since then, sort of the entire team there turned over and sort of the new team, had no idea what Monte Carlo is, what we do. And then suddenly they actually had this massive data problem where sort of there was a big change and, sort of all the data flowed correctly, but the data itself was actually inaccurate. And that had an impact on both their customers and their product. Actually, we caught that in near real time, and using Monte Carlo, they could actually identify what was the root cause and what was the downstream impact and all of that. And basically overnight, the entire team was logged in and using the product. And that was a very important lesson for me, right? In a way, when you sort of focus on the customers and the pain point, everything else, becomes easier or becomes more apparent.
Yeah. That's awesome. And that's such a great story, and so hugely validating as a founder to be able to see, people really getting true value out of what you're doing. Now, we're two startup founders here in this space. We are trying to offer in the sliver of the DataOps lifecycle that we operate in. We're trying to offer great experiences for our customers, looking at high adoption rates, really wanting people to get value out of what we do. If you do start thinking, and in a lot of the ways that you can accelerate value is to go best of breed. Right now, the one commonality I see across everything in our space is the need to have solid metadata. Right?
For sure.
I actually fundamentally believe that if we can, as a category, if companies like ours can interchange metadata more reliably and at a faster rate to be able to get up and running, we can actually accelerate moving towards a more best of breed style ecosystem. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't necessarily offer a little bit of catalog and I don't offer a little bit of quality, right? Everybody needs to start somewhere, to your point, right? You got to start at the pain you most frequently have. But let's talk a little bit about metadata and what it would mean if we could actually truly interchange metadata between our companies.
Yeah, for sure. I think first of all, the idea of data sharing is brilliant, right? In general, and there's many different ways of doing that, right? I think metadata has taken a very interesting, sort of new trajectory in the space more recently. It's sort of, kind of like the lifeblood of your data stack, if you will. And at the same time, it's completely useless without a business use case. No one can convince me that metadata is actually interesting in a void. I've never seen that ever useful. And so I think when we sort of marry these two, sort of the customer pain points and sort of this rise of metadata that we're seeing, that's where the magic lies. If we can share metadata or put metadata to new use cases or unlock value with metadata, that's, I think, where the value is. For companies who are actually working a lot with metadata, I think some of the sort of trends that's helping this is sort of thinking of data as a product, meaning thinking at it as like, who's the particular audience for the data, and not treating it as something that's very static and opaque. And so that, I think, is one of sort of the key trends that helping it here as well, and help us make sense of how we can use metadata. I think we talk a lot about, in the past, sort of folks like to just, hoard tons of data and just collect more and more and store it wherever you wanted. And then just realize that actually more is not necessarily better in this case. And I think the same is with metadata. Let's apply it to something that's actually useful. And I think there are lots of problems to do it, but I think that's sort of where the magic will be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. I mean, you look at it this way, right? There's been an evolution even in metadata platforms and products, right? If you go back, if you look at some of the original metadata management platforms, even right up to and including something like Apache Atlas, it's like an incredibly technical metadata store. To your point, it's metadata for metadata's sake. And I mean, have you ever seen people get real excited about their Atlas deployment? People do great work there, and it has become a very good backbone of a lot of other technical solutions. But I've never seen a huge user community be like, I'm excited because I'm going to go fix some metadata in Atlas today. But yeah, and Gartner's retiring their entire quadrant right now around metadata management and trying to evolve it into something else that will hopefully be more use case driven. And one of those use cases I've seen obviously is governance, right? We like to think about governance at Data.World as being a really participatory thing. It's a little bit more of a what's the process by which we do data analytics work together, and how do we capture knowledge during that process? And obviously that knowledge gets translated to metadata, and it can be handed to something like an observability platform. But let's actually talk a little bit about that in a governance process. In this more agile data governance world where we're a little bit more inclusive, what kind of role does something like observability play in that?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm, for the record, super excited about Data.World is doing to sort of evangelize, what I would think is sort of a customer-centric data catalog. I think it's, obviously a great application of some of the most important things that you could do. And I think the sort of deprecation of Gartner's quadrant makes a lot of sense, right? In sort of that vein, I think there's a difference between metadata management and governance. Metadata management is sort of a capability. Governance is an outcome of different things that you could deploy. And so if you're actually thinking about what governance, and again, governance is used in very many different ways, but one definition could be, how do you actually protect and manage and sort of address access of your user data? And that obviously becomes more important with recent regulations like GDPR, et cetera, and talks a lot about how metadata should be used. But metadata by itself doesn't tell you about, whether in that vein, how it actually is being used. There's sort of different capabilities for that. And so in order to achieve strong governance, that might mean different application of metadata. And so, I think there's a lot of sort of buzzwords, thrown around here, which I'm excited to see sort of where they go and how they evolve. I'm actually excited to hear from you. How do you think about sort of the intersection of governance and metadata?
Yeah, so I think metadata is one of those things that can really enable governance in a more fluid and more inclusive way, right? Like if you have good metadata available, if it's presented in a way that's discoverable and people are discovering the right data assets to use at the right time, you will by nature end up with a well-governed data program. But to do that, what you're really thinking about, in my opinion, is that like, how do I build trust and how do I guide people to the right assets for the right purpose? And when I arrive there, do they understand it? Do they trust it? I think that's actually where observability can play a huge role. Like, how do we make sure that people understand the state that this data exists in and whether or not it's going to be useful for the thing that I'm trying to do with it? And so I think being able to enable a trustworthy, but not necessarily exposing all of the data, but a trustworthy way of exploring the data and understanding and learning about the data, and a way for people can, like, as they gain knowledge, to contribute back to that, right? To be able to send a signal to, let's say, a reliability engineer that, hey, this may not be what I'm expecting it to be. Can you also perform these checks? Have that built into an almost CI/CD style pipeline that then gets checked, in real time through an observability platform like Monte Carlo. I think, that will create a lot more of the fluidity that we see from DevOps processes, but in the data and analytics world.
Yeah, for sure. Couldn't agree more with that. I think there's, sort of going back to the DevOps example, again, there's so many things that we do there that are table stakes, right? Like, trust and or reliability of your applications, right? Making sure that your apps and your infrastructure is up and running. Something that goes without saying, right? And I think one of the more tangible ways to think about that is like what you measure in that aspect. And so a lot of the measurement that we look at sort of in the world of space in DevOps is things like reliability of application and time to detection and time to resolution. And when you apply that to the data space, we're seeing more and more teams applying those measurements here. And so we're seeing things like on the discovery side or catalog side, we see things like time to insights as our measurement. We see percentage of decisions in a company made based on data, which is interesting. We see time to detection, time to resolution on the reliability side. And we also see SLA starting to get adopted. And I think those are some of the, kind of symptoms of manifestations of DataOps, right? And having all of those in place allows you, well, first of all, it's completely impossible to do without metadata. Like, we couldn't solve any of those without metadata. And if we do those well, then we will achieve sort of data trust and strong data governance.
That's awesome. So we're running out of time here. I think this has been an awesome conversation, Bar. Like, thank you so much. For me, the things I think about here are, to your point, hey, like, what are your use cases for metadata? And use those use cases to drive the capabilities you want to build on top of metadata so that people don't end up with tool fatigue as you start getting excited about building this DataOps ecosystem, right? I also think about, metadata being truly the backbone for this as you do plug in more and more capability and being able to model all of these scenarios out and have good interchange of information to build that trusted ecosystem. One of the things, and maybe we'll leave with maybe a final thought from you, thinking about the future a little bit. And going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, you talked a little bit about, distributed systems. And we see a lot going on with the idea of distributed data systems and domain modeled architectures like data mesh. That's something that you've commented on before. And we have some other speakers coming up here today who are also thinking about that. What do you think about that as a wrap up?
Yeah, for sure. It's such a great question. I mean, obviously, the data mesh is something that we've seen a lot more of. A lot of the customers I talk to either are adopting a data mesh today, or they don't understand what data mesh is, but it's something there clicks and totally resonates, and they love sort of the end goal and the vision. Or they're actually implementing a data mesh and they don't even realize it, or sort of realize it later. So we really kind of like get a broad range, from across our customer base. I think, the concept of data mesh really resonate, again, for folks who have seen sort of the move to distributed architectures, in software engineering. And, naturally it makes sense to do something similar here. I think, the idea of data mesh is actually fundamentally quite simple. I know Zhamak is speaking later today, and I'm excited for her to kind of better explain what it is. But I think it fundamentally addresses a lot of the problems that we talked about before around teams being a bottleneck, ownership around data not being clear, the ability to just build scalable, reliable, robust data systems is really hard. And data mesh enables that. And it's a combination of cultural things and process things and tools thing and all that stuff wrapped up together. Ultimately, I think seeing real life examples of what this is what sort of the industry needs. And we're seeing more and more of that. Actually, one of our customers, Red Ventures, gave a fantastic talk at FiveTrans conference last week as an example for what that looks like. And we're seeing more and more of those adopted. Generally, I do think that there's a lot of concepts that we talked about today that the data mesh includes, like self-serve, like treating data as a product, like the importance of metadata, the ability to share data and to align on standards when it relates to data. So, I think whether you sort of like data mesh or not, sort of what side you are, or, what your thoughts on it, I think there's a lot of concepts here that are very, very important. And de facto, we are seeing sort of folks adopting them and seeing strong results with a lot of these concepts.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bar. This has been a real honor. I love it whenever we have a chance to chat. And it is really great to see all of the success that y'all are having with Monte Carlo. You talked about walking into a bar and having a drink once in one of the articles that you wrote, right, and mixing some cocktails. I really do wish we could go do that. But, we'll get around to that. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of the Data.World Summit. And thank you again.
Thank you. Cheers.
Hi, I'm Lisa Novak, VP Employee Experience, our HR and recruiting team at Data.World. We hope you're having a great time at the summit so far. There is so much more still ahead, and we're happy to have you joining us through all of it. Data.World is growing fast, and we are looking for exceptional talent to grow our team in what's a very challenging market. We know that means we have to provide a unique, flexible, challenging, and rewarding environment for you. So check out our open opportunities at data.world/careers and let us tell you why it's more fun to work here. Meanwhile, have a great time at the summit for the rest of the day.
Hey, I'm Amber Thomas, community lead here at Data.World. Our next speakers created a podcast called Catalog and Cocktails to recreate the atmosphere of happy hour after a conference where you're talking to new, interesting, and exciting people. And that's an atmosphere we're trying to recreate here today as well. So take a moment, if you haven't already, to join our Slack community by going into the menu below your video player. Now, in this session, Tim Gasper, our VP of Product, and Juan Cicada, our Principal Scientist, are going to be discussing data teams and how these teams are evolving to include new roles, particularly the Knowledge Scientist and the Data Product Manager. So go enjoy the session, come find us on Slack, and don't forget to subscribe to the Catalog and Cocktails podcast on your favorite podcast platform.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special Wednesday edition of Catalog and Cocktails. Catalog and Cocktails is an honest, no BS, non-salesy conversation about enterprise data management. And this is for the Fall Summit, Fall 2021 Summit, which is awesome because we usually just do this on Wednesday afternoons with our special guests. And this is actually kind of a throwback to a previous way that we've done this. So, by the way, I'm Tim Gasper, VP of Product at Data.World, longtime product and data nerd person, and joined by Juan Cicada. Hey, Juan.
Hey, Tim. How are you doing? I'm Juan Cicada. I'm the Principal Scientist at Data.World, and it's Wednesday, and today is going to be an awesome Wednesday because we're going to do this twice. We're going to have the summit, the Catalog and Cocktail Summit, and then later in the afternoon, we're going to have the cocktails with our CNC. So,
yeah,
Tim,
only coffee today.
Coffee here right now. So, Tim, what are we talking about today? We got to talk about what's next when it comes to the emerging new data professionals. We're talking about knowledge scientists and data product managers. But hey, I'm always in the position is to understand where we want to go. We need to know where we're coming from. Like, where are we right now, and understand our past, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Or if we are going to reinvent the wheel, we're going to really improve upon that past wheel. So
yeah, I mean, because wheels are okay. Like, you don't want to turn it into a square. That would be a step in the wrong direction here. Yeah, I mean, data roles have seen a lot of evolution in the last, let's call it 15, 20 years, right? If you're looking at kind of the big picture here. And it's interesting, as you're saying, right, to look at some of these new roles, which we'll talk about briefly, that have merged, and then talk about some ones that are emerging, right? Some new roles that are kind of changing the way that we're doing data, and some of the forward-thinking data organizations are really starting to pioneer. But going back in history, right, it kind of all starts with the or go ahead, yeah.
Well, the way let's take it 20 plus years, and let's think about, hey, the big data revolution comes around, right? So
sure.
We have the context as you have the web is generating so much data. You have Moore's law. So we start collecting all this amount of data. You have all these NoSQL systems coming out. You have commodity distributed platforms like Hadoop. And our goal is to say, we got so much data. Let's go bring this in and let's go manage that. And this starts to evolve the role of a data engineer. You have people starting to go learn how to go do Hadoop, and Hadoop was not an easy thing to go set up. So that was that first role that we started seeing. And why? Because we started gathering, because of big data, that was that big context and that need to be able to go harness and collect a lot of data. And now that kind of becomes mainstream, right? Let's say end of 2000s, right? Beginning 2010. And we now have big data, right? We're living in this era of big data. We have this era of now more compute like GPUs, and this whole AI revolution starts, right? Machine learning takes it to the next level. We start talking about deep learning and everything. And people are saying, wait, we got a ton of data. And now people are talking about their data lake, but I'm going to get value out of my data. So this is when we start seeing data scientists coming, right? The seminal paper at the Harvard Business Review by DJ Patil, who was actually a guest on our show. He in 2012 is when the whole title data scientist starts to become very, very popular. And what happens with the technology is all this machine learning, all this stuff becomes almost a commodity, right? You can now get TensorFlow and SciPy, all this stuff. Now we're there. Now we're getting.
So you got these two roles now, right? You got the data scientists who are kind of doing the machine learning, the statistical analysis. Because of the data engineers and all the work that they've done, they've got more data than ever that they can work with, structured data, unstructured data. Now you want to do really cool things with it. Now you've got these two roles, right? And I think many people think about sort of the modern data teams, doing advanced analytics. They think about, sort of analysts that have always been around. They think about data scientists and data engineers, right? Here's kind of your pillars, right?
Yeah, and that's why I like to consider them as like the data producers. That's where you have your data engineers, and now kind of more in the enterprise, your data stewards to make sure where data comes from, and then your consumers who are going to be your data scientists and kind of quote unquote your old school business analysts, data analysts, and so forth. And now what we're seeing today is when it comes to the ML, like they're now ML engineering, right? And now we're getting
people
more
who specialize in taking machine learning models to production at scale, yada, yada, right?
That's one. And then something that we're seeing recently is also this analytics engineering. And this I really like, because the folks are good friends at DBT, right? They're pushing a lot the T and ETL. That T is really, really important. That transformation is where you have a lot of the business logic. And now with tools like Snowflake and so forth, right? You really are democratizing the way how you can actually create and manage these lakes or your data sources, your data warehouses. But that transformation, this is a lot of the business side. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing things come in. And it's the position is, hey, if you're data analyst, you know a lot about the business. Once you know more about SQL, you have so much power. And I think this is this role of the data and this analytics engineer. That's what I'm really.
And we even had Drew Bannon from DBT Labs, formerly Fishtown Analytics, on our show previously, Catalog and Cocktails. We ended up talking about a few different topics, but we also talked a little bit about this analytics engineering role. And it seems to be part of a little bit of the micro trend here, right? Which is the sort of hybridizing of some of these different things, right? In some ways, you could think of when a data scientist and a data engineer, you bring those skills together, you focus it on machine learning, you get the ML engineer, right? If you focus on sort of the skills of an analyst, the sort of the SQL skills, the BI skills, and you combine that with sort of the data engineering skills, you get somewhat of this sort of analytics engineer, right? But as we've gone through this process, it's been interesting because previously, the previous paradigm has really thought of data more as data as a service, right? It's sort of like I have business questions and things like that. I want to really sort of like answer those business questions, and it's a little bit more of a reactive function. And a data scientist or analyst, they're reacting to, oh, business needs to know the answer to this today, right? And the data engineer is reacting to, oh, the pipeline broke today, right? And some organizations have been able to get in front of that a little bit. And, you think about the Googles and the Spotifys and things like that, right? And the big sort of aha there that's starting to now spread to other companies is this concept of data, not as a service, but as a product, right? And treating data more like something that needs to have well-defined interfaces and sort of an SLA or an SLO where you say, hey, like it's supposed to act in a certain way and it has certain goals in terms of functionality. And it's something that you can depend on and grow as a product proactively, not just a reactive
Let me guess.
function.
Does this data product have a manager or an owner?
It probably needs to, right? And that's a great setup here for this role that's emerging, which is the data product manager, right? Who has sort of the skills and mindset of a product manager, right? Who sort of understands the requirements and the needs of the business and then creates a roadmap and guides the building of that product and the maintaining of that product in a sustainable way, not just a reactive way.
I love how you're setting this up, is that you want it to not be just reactive. That's how we've always been, right? Let's have the business questions. I need to go answer the business questions. And okay, let me deliver you data for that business question. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing of why you want to have data as a product. And with everything like this morning about data mesh, the ideas of having a data mesh is centered. One of those main pillars is treating data as a product. And the idea is that you want to say, hey, I'm going to give you something that other people, who those consumers are, they're going to be able to go take it and they should be able to go run with it. And they know how to go combine it with something else. They know who to go talk to. They got that data product manager. That data product manager wants to be able to understand what and who and how are they using their product, get that feedback, get requirements, and how to improve that. So this is those big fundamental changes that we're starting to go see. When I talk to prospects, talk to customers, talk to friends, colleagues, I ask them, are you treating data as a product? And I'll be very honest, no BS. How does this tangibly look like? I think a lot of people still are trying to define this. My specific thing is I want to have a beautiful table, that this table has every single row represents an order, and every single column actually has words that I know what it means, and it is connected to a business glossary. That for me is a tabular data product. I may want to go have a graph data product. I want to go have a subset of the graph of our top 100 customers and the products that they're buying, because I'm going to go create a machine learning model with that. So that's right. So this is the top 100 customer and relationships product.
It might be an API, right? An API service. It might be a streaming, like a pub sub kind of setup, right? So all of these are potential ways to deliver, right? Technical channels to deliver these and sort of structures for these different data products. And, one last comment on this is that, often if data, analysis and data science and data engineering is working well in your company, somebody's wearing that data product hat. You just aren't explicitly calling it out, right? And I think what's changing now is people are actually starting to formalize this role and this responsibility.
And this is super important. And ask within your organization, who is responsible for that data? Who's accountable if something not good happens, right? Who gets celebrated if something amazing happens, right? And again, this is not just the person, it's also the team around this, right? Which we'll touch about in a second. But one of the things, I'm really happy that we're starting to go see this whole data as a product. But one of the other things that we're starting to go see this transition is that we focus so much on data. And I think the last 20 plus years, everything has been data, right? The data warehouse into the data lake, we do ETL, turn to ELT, but it's always been give me more data, right? And all these titles are about data, and reminds me of Einstein's definition of insanity, right? Keep doing things over and over again and expecting different results. The problems that we struggle till today are the same problems we struggled 20 years ago. And for some reason, we are thinking that by doing the same things, we are solving the problem. No, we are literally driving ourselves to insanity. Something needs to change, and it needs to be something big transformational.
Being data driven doesn't seem like it's enough, right?
That's it. It's not enough. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. It's not enough. What's next? And I think my personal point of view is that we need to start having this transition of being from data first to knowledge first. Start thinking about what does this stuff actually mean, and start documenting it, and start presenting the data in a way that it is accessible to the entire organization. And when we always talk about being data literate, what does data literate actually mean? That I can just give you data, you know how to go use it? My perspective is, if somebody is data literate, you have a data literate organization, is that people acknowledge that there are X amount of different definitions for a customer. And they know which definition of a customer is going on. And they know that if I'm getting data from somebody, from some other team, they know which version of a customer it is. They're asking those questions. That is when we start being knowledge first, and we start really thinking more about our data domain models, thinking about our business glossaries and how the business glossaries, that knowledge terminology is connected to the actual data. That's where we need to head.
That is so important. And I think that a lot of organizations do two things wrong here, right? One is that they don't connect sort of the idea of knowledge and data together. They think that they're separate, right? And the other thing is they don't go far enough in many cases, right? Like, I think some organizations that are starting to really think about how knowledge ties into their data, they're doing some things. And we see this even with some of our own customers at Data.World, where they're developing like glossaries, right? The idea of like, okay, build out your glossary. Let's define things, build out your data dictionary, right? But that's not really enough to really become knowledge first, right? To get people as the focus, to get context as the focus, and to get connections, interconnections between your data and the definitions and the knowledge of your business to be the focus.
And for that, I think the new emerging role here that this is something I'm personally pushing a lot is this role of the knowledge scientist, or the knowledge engineer 2.0. And it's important to know that this isn't something that we're coming up with it right now. In the 90s, during the expert systems era, the late AI, right before the AI winter, it was all about having knowledge engineers and being able to go understand the end users and come up with the rules and be able to go implement that. We need that today. We need to update that with the scale of knowledge, with the scale of data. A lot of people still think, hey, take these two schemas and go automatically match them. I'm like, no, we don't even know what this means. Not even the humans will agree what this means. Why do we think the machines will come in and give us the right thing? So the role of the knowledge scientist is somebody who can work with both sides of their brain, right? They can be very technical. They can be very social. They from a technical perspective, right? They when they talk to the business users, they know how to go talk about business domain models and draw an ontology, draw the conceptual models. When they're talking to the technical side, they know where the data is. We can get into the databases and write the SQL queries. When on the social side, when they're talking to the business folks, they can be people persons. They're not going to get too geeky, but when we're going to go to the technical side, we can get very, very geeky, right? And they're able to manage these requirements and do these translations.
So a knowledge scientist is sort of a facilitator and a translator.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent definition for that. And then all of this comes together is, how do you put the knowledge scientists with your data scientists, your data engineers, your data product managers? They're part of a team. And how does this team work? It's understanding this balance between centralization and decentralization. And this is really depends on the culture within the organization, the size, where you want to go. And there's no right or wrong answer here.
Do what's right for you, right? And I love that data mesh is becoming such a hot topic, not because it's the answer, because it's some sort of a silver bullet or a panacea, right? But because it's got us talking. It's got us talking about, like, when do you decentralize? When do you centralize? Which parts should be centralized? Which should be decentralized? And what parts of the team should be centralized or decentralized, right? The engineers versus the scientists versus the analysts, the knowledge scientists and the data product managers.
And as a final point, and I always, whenever I talk with Shamak about this, it's a reminder to everybody, there is no data mesh vendor. You cannot buy that. If somebody's selling you that, go run away. For me, it's the data mesh, as you said, is giving us that opportunity to talk about data as a product and thinking about the balance between centralization, decentralization. What are the people and processes? We are in a very exciting era right now. We have been doing the same thing over and over again for 20 plus years. Right now, it is time to be transformational, time to change. It is not just about technology, people. It's about people and processes. Think about, are you the knowledge scientist? Are you a data product manager? Do you feel responsible for your data? Then you're probably looking about this new era of knowledge. So from data first to knowledge first.
Yep. Double down on data, double down on data products, double down on knowledge. Juan, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Everyone who's watching, please make sure you join us Wednesdays at 4 o'clock Central on all your favorite social platforms and all your favorite podcast platforms. We're always talking about data, and we love it. Thanks for joining the conversation, everyone.
Cheers. Happy Wednesday.
Cheers, Juan.